I promised you guys a dedicated episode to Pirates of the Caribbean, the ride in Disneyland Paris, and here it is. Welcome to Factor Nostalgia, where we discuss everything theme park then, now, and when. I'm your host, Sarah, and last week we talked about Disneyland Paris's Adventureland and what the original idea was when it was created by Imagineers. I said then that the Pirates of the Caribbean ride in Paris deserved its own episode, so that's what we're going to do today. Here's what you can expect. We're going to take a look at what the original ride was intended to look like, what it looks like after the refurb, and is it indeed the best Pirates of the Caribbean ride, which is something that you find in some corners of the internet. So first things first, what was the original intention? Let's take a look at the very first version of this ride, which was back when Walt Disney was still alive. It was the last ride that he actively worked on. So that's kind of a fun little fact, I suppose. The first version of the ride opened in March 1967, and at the time it was groundbreaking because of the audio animatronics. Now, there's a whole history about how audio animatronics came about, but what you need to know is, before then, the moving figures and whatnot was relatively rare, and Walt Disney and the Imagineers kind of found a way to synchronize sound with the movements of these animated characters. So that was the birth of audio animatronics. Now, originally, it was supposed to be a kind of a wax figure museum type of walkthrough situation. And the Imagineer who worked on it was Mark Davis. Now, if you're familiar with Imagineering, you might have heard this name before because this guy is pretty legendary. And he was known for putting in visual gags into his style of, into his designs, which is probably why he was asked to do this because, pirates can be scary, I suppose. So they wanted to make sure that it was family friendly and, that everybody would be able to have a good time. We're going to jump ahead a little bit because by the time they built Disneyland Paris, as with everything, they had opened several parks already, and they took everything they learned and tried to make it bigger and better in Disneyland Paris. So when they started working on it, they broke ground in 1988. They were determined to put in 2 drops, which is unique in and of its own. And the ride became so big that the whole thing takes place over 3 stories, over 2 show buildings. So indoor rides are placed in show buildings that you can't really see once you're in the park. That is something that Disney does very well with hiding these buildings, sometimes in plain sight, but usually you really can't see them because they're big gray boxes that really are unappealing. But the point is, um, it takes place over 2 show buildings, which is a big deal. It's a very, very long ride, especially compared to the original rides that are over in the States. So it did open on opening day. It was one of the opening day attractions, so it's been there for a while, but it's still popular. It is still very popular. So let's first take a look at the actual ride itself. For those of you that don't know, yes, there are Pirates movies, and these movies were based on the ride, not the other way around. And they tried this several times, and I think Pirates is really the only time they did it really successfully. Correct me if I'm wrong, of course. But the fun part is when they decided to design the one for Paris, they decided to change the order of the scenes around, add some new scenes, add some updated effects. And the original order of the ride, if I recall correctly, is actually more in line with what the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, Curse the Black Pearl, how that movie goes is more in line with the order of the ride as it was originally in Paris. Oh, before we go on, by the way, let me address the pronunciation. So, because some people say Pirates of the Caribbean and some people say Pirates of the Caribbean. Let me fix that for you right now, not just in how you pronounce the ride, but in any type of conversation. Caribbean is a noun. Caribbean is an adjective. Okay? All right. So don't be commenting on this that I'm saying it wrong. I'm not. All right. Thank you. Moving on. So in the Adventureland episode, we talked about how instead of having a New Orleans square in Adventureland, Disneyland Paris has something modeled after an old fort that was supposed to protect the city or the town from pirates. Now, the fort that they have was modeled after the San Felipe del Moro, I think it was, in Puerto Rico. And as you enter the queue for the ride, you go into the fort, and as you move through the fort, you see different things. You can see that there are indeed, sort of these small little slits for arrows and rifles and everything to protect against pirates, to shoot from there. There are um, plenty of props. There's cabins that were supposed to be for crew. There's dungeons. And somewhere in there is a cannon. And that's not a prop. Like, that's a real cannon from the 1800s. I'm not entirely sure where it is exactly, but since I'm going soon, I'll keep an eye out for it. So it's all pretty well done. Um, Clearly, it's very, very badly lit, which kind of adds to the atmosphere, and I like it. So anyway, you come out in the harbor, and there's some trees and plants and things, and it looks nice. It feels like it's a starry night in the Caribbean. So you move through the last part of the queue, and you enter your little boat with about what is it, 35-ish people. The first scene you move through is kind of, you go through an old galleon that looks stranded, broken, I don't know, something like that. And from there, you pass by the restaurant. Now, from here, you approach the first lift, which means that there's going to be a drop soon. This lift is kind of modeled after, how in the olden days they had these provision lifts, kind of like a, goods and services, well, goods lift really, that was supposed to like bring provisions in. And so that through that, you go up into the rest of the ride. And the idea is that this makes you time travel and you go back in time. And remember that old galleon that you just passed through? Yeah, you're about to see what happened. So the first thing you see is pirates running amok, really. And as you move through, you run through the jail scene that's also in the movie, in the first movie, where they try to coax the dog out to bring him the key. And you see stuff happening on both sides of the boat, which means you can't see what's happening. You see, in the meantime, while the pirates were fighting, somebody blew a hole in the wall, and it's through that hole that you're about to experience your first drop. You're now outside of the fort and thrust into the middle of the battle scene between the pirates and the town. There's shooting, there's gunfire, there's cannonballs, there's all sorts of things going on. Now, this part of the ride is mostly similar to the at the time existing ones, where you see different scenes of the pirates entering the town and just doing all sorts of piratey stuff. So they're stealing stuff, they're fighting, they're drinking, they're trying to auction off women, which is a whole other thing that we'll get into post refurb. And all these different scenes that might look familiar, something that they did with these new added effects. So first of all, there were sword fighting animatronics, which was a very big deal at the time. And at some point, you see the town is being set ablaze. And the way they accomplished this to make it look like there was actual fire indoors is again the work of an Imagineer, Yale Gracie, who was known for his special effects work. He also did a bunch of work on the Haunted Mansion and things like that. So, if you wanted something cool and look like an illusion, he's your guy, or was your guy. Then as you near, not really the end of the ride, but it feels like the end of the ride, you go through what is the arsenal, so where they keep all the weaponry and the gunpowder and things like that. And of course, because the town is on fire right behind you, that doesn't really go well with, things like gunpowder now, does it? So as the room or the area explodes, you go through your second drop, and suddenly you're in a whole different type of world. And this part of the ride shows you what actually happened to all those pirates that spend their lives accumulating treasure. So what you'll see here are skeletons, really, and they died doing what they loved. So there's one who's still sort of trying to steer a ship. There's the guy sitting on a pile of gold, but dead. There are the pirates, the dead pirates that are still drinking. And then as the ride comes to a close, you sail back into the dock where you left off into the harbor. And you exit, of course, through a gift shop, because how else would you leave a Disney ride? Now, that was the original idea for the ride. A while back, we talked about IP in the parks and whether it's, good or bad. Why do they do this? Um, and one of the things that I mentioned back then, which still stands, um, is that sometimes it's really just a matter of relatability. So what they did with the last really big refurb is that they added in scenes from the Pirates movies. Why? Because for us millennials, people older than us, we knew about the rides before we knew about the movie, generally speaking. Again, it's people try to act like going to the Disney parks is a rite of passage in your childhood, and it's not. Okay, don't let anybody pressure you if you feel like it's too expensive or not something you want to do. Don't let anybody pressure you. But the idea is that we all knew about the ride first, and then the movie came out. But by now, there's a whole generation. Gen Z is grown up, so they're adults, and we have Gen Alpha, which is already sort of moving into the next generation, honestly, being born. So there's a whole new like group of people that were born that only lived through the movies already existing, and oh hey, then there's the ride. So because of that, I'm assuming it's because of that, after the refurb, they added in a bunch of scenes from the movie. So now when you go through the town and you see all the different scenes of, uh, pirates causing all sorts of disasters, um, you can see Jack Sparrow hiding. You can see Will Turner in the sword fights. Things like that. Some of the other things they changed, as I mentioned, when they were auctioning off women, they felt like, maybe that's not great. Maybe we shouldn't really do that anymore. So they, first of all, I think they added in some female pirates as well, which, is debatable whether or not that's historically accurate, but, that's neither here nor there. But they also just made the women a bit more, how should I put this? They made them less helpless, which is always a good thing. We don't really mess with the whole damsel in distress type of thing anymore. So anyway, so those are some of the changes they made, and then you see the biggest change, of course, in the last part of the ride when you go through the skeletons, because in the first movie, of course, spoiler alert, but if you haven't seen it at this point, that's your own fault. You have, of course, the chest of gold coins that if not all the coins are returned, all the pirates are undead and all of that. So you see Jack Sparrow, Barbossa, all these characters, and they're still singing the song. The same song is still a part of the ride. Yo ho, a pirate's life for me. It's on Spotify. Check it out. It's really cute. But Jack Sparrow is also singing it. And you see him sitting on his throne and, being undead, I suppose. So that's stuff that happened after the refurb. And I'm not super mad at it. I understand why they did it. I'm also not really a big fan of it, especially, again, the whole thing about, not just putting women there as sort of these helpless objects, really, as they were treated. That's fine. I don't mind that part. Also because of, technological improvements that were made in the animatronics themselves. Great. Wonderful. But the whole IP thing, I mean, you guys know how I feel about it, so I'm not going to get into it. I'll link the IP episode, I'll link to it in the show notes so you can listen to that, because if I go into that now, it'll be a whole new tangent. And no. Anyway, does that make this the best Pirates ride there is, though? It depends. Once again, it depends. Why do I say that? Because I have not been to Shanghai Disneyland, but they have a version that looks super impressive. I have no other words for it. It's a combination of, again, just the boat and the ride through and things like that. But then there's screen work, 360-degree screen work, and I've only seen some images of it online and in on Behind the Attraction. There's an episode on Pirates of the Caribbean specifically. It's on Disney Plus, so if you guys are interested in that, go check it out. But it shows some scenes from that version of the ride, and it's very reliant on the movies once again, because it was built so late, obviously, and it was built under Bob Iger, and his whole thing is push IP. So, it's very IP heavy, and if you don't mind that, then this version is again pretty impressive. If you're more into like the old school type of vibe with just the audio animatronics and the old scenes that then Paris might be better for you. All that being said, that doesn't mean I don't want to visit the one in Shanghai, because I do. I really do. I don't know if I ever will, but who knows? So once again, is it the best one? It depends. It depends on what you find most important in a ride. But the most technologically advanced by now, I think, would be Shanghai. But I do like that the one in Paris is a lot longer. It passes through the restaurant. They do the theming so well. Everything from the queue to the foliage to the ride itself, obviously. The restaurant that's right there. It's beautiful. There's really not much I can say about it other than that. Let me know what you think, though. If you think I'm wrong, do tell me. You can tell me I'm wrong about the content. You can not tell me I'm wrong about the pronunciation of the Caribbean. No, okay, you can, but, well, suit yourself. Anyway, thank you for listening to today's episode. Please do 3 things if you want to help me out, if you want to be a good neighbor. Share this episode with somebody you think might be interested, a friend, a neighbor, a dog walker, a babysitter, a parent, an auntie, whomever. Second, please leave a rating or a review in whatever podcast player you're using to listen to this. And finally, please subscribe to the podcast. You can do that on all the usual suspects: Spotify, Apple, YouTube, you name it, stuff like that. A little sneak peek ahead for you guys of what's coming. So like I said, I'm going to visit Disneyland Paris again soon. I'm not going to make any real promises on when the episodes will be out, because I have a lot to juggle at the moment in my own personal life, but I will try to get as much footage as possible from the renovations that are going on, and I'll also try to do another episode on that. But if you want to make sure that you catch the footage and also get some Christmassy vibes from Disneyland Paris, make sure you follow along on Instagram. That's at factornostalgia. Okay? Cool. So thank you again very much for listening, and I'll catch you in the next episode.